that I was actually in middle school during the 2001 terrorist attacks. And so I sort of remember a time where being Muslim, it wasn't necessarily feared or hated. You were maybe kind of an outsider. It was sort of a different identity. But that shift into now people are afraid of me, now there's this hatred. And when we think about our youth, something interesting to think about, individuals who are entering college right now, who are freshmen in college, they were born in 2001 to 2002. So that generation, born after this sharp rise, born into this environment of Islamophobia, does not really know any other sort of point of reference. So college students and the youngsters, below them, they were born and raised in this environment. And so it's really interesting to think about how does that impact them versus maybe the older generation that remembers sort of a different time. And I'll talk about that a bit with my sample. My sample was not focused on youth, but it was a majority youth sample. So just to set the stage a bit again, when I was collecting this data, following during the 2016 election, there was a lot of negative rhetoric about Islam. Trump was talking about the Muslim ban, people were cheering, we saw the Muslim ban actually take effect. We saw a lot of high-profile hate crimes against Muslims, for example, jumping back, the Chapel Hill shootings in 2015, 3 college students in North Carolina were killed. After the Orlando nightclub shooting in 2016, Muslims were vilified all over again. There was the young Somali-American Muslim girl, Nejma Hassanan, who was found beaten and murdered in Minnesota during Ramadan 2017. So there was a lot of negativity, and I started sort of my journey with research studying instances of discrimination, because we know that discrimination can be very distressing. This is found throughout the literature, and I know personally for myself, I grew up in the area of St. Louis, Missouri, a bit less diverse than where I am now. I relocated to Chicago, but just that feeling of, being stared at was the norm, being looked at kind of funny. I could tell you a lot about my personal stories, but I don't want to go on about that. But there's the idea that people experience these instances of discrimination and this bullying, but we also have this broader negativity. And that's what I was interested more in studying, is how I understand how Islamophobia is impacting people's mental health, outside of just, I was personally, a rude comment was said to me, but this negativity in the media. And media now is so prevalent. It's social media, it's watching the news, it's everywhere. So we're constantly plugged into this. And I also mentioned, of course, in that last slide, Muslims have been the target of systemic injustice, mass surveillance, and all of that followed. So it really does often feel like an unsafe environment. There is a fear that's just sort of in the air that I wanted to capture and see how it was impacting people. So when I did a literature search, I found that Kunst and his colleagues have developed the perceived Islamophobia scale in Europe. And it was one of the first scales that looked at Islamophobia not from the standpoint of non-Muslims fearing Muslims, but actually from Muslims' perspective of how they perceive other people perceiving them. So how do I understand, my mainstream culture, whatever that is, feelings toward Muslims? And they also wanted to differentiate experiences of discrimination from perceived Islamophobia. They did this study across different countries in Europe. They looked at groups such as Turkish Muslims in Germany, Pakistani Muslims in Britain, and Moroccan Muslims in France. And they found that for many of these groups, perceived Islamophobia, sorry, I have a loud voice, it's too loud. Perceived Islamophobia was related to psychological distress for Muslims, even after controlling for, pulling out those specific instances of discrimination. Just that perception of Islamophobia in my society, in my country, was related to distress. They developed the scale through focus groups, through literature reviews. They found 3 main areas, 3 main subscales. First, a general fear of Islam. Next, a fear of Islamization, this belief that Islamic values are in conflict with Western values. And finally, that there are negative portrayals of Muslim and Islam in the media. And you can see some sample items there as well. So the way that I was viewing this study, I wanted to understand, not just what are people experiencing and what are the distress that they're in, but what are some protective factors? What are some strengths? So how can, being a Muslim in a Western society or in a society where you're stigmatized, it can be a risk because it puts you at risk for that discrimination and stigmatization, but how can it also be a point of strength for you? The rejection identification model states that when people are rejected due to a group they belong to, identification with that group actually goes up. And so even though rejection and prejudice can be distressing, identification can actually increase well-being. So in this way, when we're rejected, we identify, and when we identify, we are better able to cope. We're better able to kind of be resilient in the face of Islamophobia. And so this model has been validated in some Muslims. Perceptions of Islamophobia and your Muslim identity interact to predict your depression, anxiety, and stress symptoms. So, in a nutshell, Islamophobia did predict distress. It predicted the specific subscales. General fear predicted overall symptoms. It predicted depressive symptoms. It predicted anxiety symptoms, even after control and stress symptoms after controlling for discrimination. My interaction hypothesis was not significant for Islamophobia. Maybe we can talk more about that if we have time. Stigmatization, so that personal feeling of being stigmatized, did predict stress symptoms. And this is the interesting part. So my interaction hypothesis was supported. So centrality, that feeling again, being Muslim is important to who I am. I feel a connection to other Muslims. When I think of my self-image, being Muslim is kind of an important part of that.